My favourite thing is that they had hidden cameras everywhere. It went viral. It was on loads of different news channels. I think they got over 10,000 volunteers. They suddenly found the volunteers that they needed, but it grew a huge amount of awareness. It raised them money. It changed their profile.
For most of us, the question would be, how can we stop this happening in our town? Whereas I think a different, better question on this occasion was, if we accept it likely is going to happen this year in our town, how can we change the meaning, change the story so that nobody gets hurt and ultimately we feel we are not victims pushed around by this group, but we are in control really of what story the world is hearing about it. Well, she had, I think, little option given how high the stakes were, but to take a risk and do things slightly differently. And therefore she made the film, which maximised the chances that that would come through. Hey folks, welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots show. This is episode 162. My name's Rob Woods, and this is the show for fundraisers who want ideas and perhaps a little dose of inspiration to help you raise more money and love your job. Just before we get into it, I want to say a huge thank you to all you wonderful people who've been sharing our podcast and other free resources in the last couple of weeks. In particular, a grateful shout out to Lucy, Laura, Joanna, Michelle, Matt, Helen, and everyone else who's kindly been spreading the word on LinkedIn, or who sent me a kind message about the show or about our courses or training programs. This time, I'm again talking to my friend and colleague, Ben Swart. Ben, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you, Rob. Excited for the content and ideas we've got today.
Yes, me too. It's one of my favourite topics, and we could call it being creative or innovative, but sometimes that's a bit, I think, misleading to some people, and it gives them a picture of a certain kind of a person, and maybe our listeners feel they're not exactly that kind of person all the time. So rather than creativity, I think it's more about finding ways to solve everyday problems or sometimes big challenges in slightly different ways to what you would have done or to most people would. And I think that is more solvable than many of us are necessarily aware. And we've got a couple of stories which make us smile. I hope they make the listeners smile. Maybe at looking at these two interesting ways charities have solved some challenges, we can help our listeners look at their day-to-day challenges slightly differently. So that said, Ben, I know one of your favourite examples you heard at the International Fundraising Congress a few years ago. Over to you. What's the gist of the problem that they were trying to solve, if you could set it up?
Yeah, so there was this organisation in Frankfurt called Diakonie, and it helps vulnerable older people to get support, and most of the way they do that is with volunteers. And their problem was actually, it didn't seem to matter the different ways that they advertised, that they were still struggling to increase their volunteer numbers, and so they couldn't help enough people. The campaign came to our attention because it turns out that if you had been in Frankfurt on this particular day when they were doing the campaign, then you might have been walking through the city centre and you would have seen what we now know is one of their actors. For instance, that they recruited 3 actors, all of them aged over 80, who you would have seen one of them crossing a zebra crossing over a dual carriageway, and just at the point that they're halfway through, dropping their entire bag of shopping and oranges rolling everywhere. Or you've seen another one at the foot of a huge set of stairs over a train station, struggling to push their trolley up these stairs. Like, you'll have noticed these people in situations where they were really struggling, and as often happens in most major cities, the members of the public started to help. I think you, listener, would have done the same thing. Started to help. And when they came towards the 3 actors and started gathering the oranges and helping them, the actors, each one of them, reached into a bag they had next to them and pulled out a leaflet. And all it said on one side of the leaflet was, "You are exactly what we've been looking for. You, person who's just come over to help, you are exactly what we've been looking for." And on the other side, it has information as to how they can sign up to hear more about volunteering for Diakonie. My favourite thing is that they had hidden cameras everywhere. So they filmed this. So by all means, Google help the Omar. That was the name of the campaign. Omar is German for grandma. Google help the Omar and you'll find this campaign. It's hilarious. It went viral. It was on loads of different news channels. I think they got over 10,000 volunteers. They've suddenly found the volunteers that they needed, but it grew a huge amount of awareness. It raised them money. It changed their profile. For me, when I've analysed this and looked at why is it that this works, I think there's a couple of things that chime well with the theme of today.
Yes, sometimes, and I get why we feel this way. If you've been trying really hard over and over again, so much effort to, get people to sign up to your fundraising event or to get people to offer to volunteer, initially you can be fairly even-minded about it. But after a while, the thought can occur to you, people don't care. Why don't people care? And I just know how easily that can happen. And therefore, you start to believe that human beings are not as kind as actually, in fact, in reality, they are.
I totally agree, Rob. And for instance, I think that would have been... No one seems to care about our advert. And yet, when I've delivered this at conferences, I've often asked the question, how many people in this room, and listener, have a think, how many times have you been walking through a train station, a supermarket, and for myself on the Underground, and you've seen someone struggling, someone who looks like they don't know where they're going, someone who looks lost, someone who may appear to be vulnerable or older. And I bet you haven't just walked past. I bet there's been moments when you've turned round and helped them, held a door open for them, lifted their luggage over some stairs, pointed them in the right direction. At that moment, you felt pretty good. Like, you do care, and the act of doing it was a wonderful moment that gave you joy. I love that the people who looked at this campaign said, all across Frankfurt, there are people who care. We just need to find them. And so the first thing was, how can we find that feeling and give it to them? What could we do? And that's when their creative juices went, I think, in the same way that we know most people do care at the right time. That's when they decided, let's see if we can recreate these incidents. It's no surprise that this one, I think, innovative campaign of the year, that they got more volunteers. And I guess for me, it might not appear it, but I think it is insight driven. Like, the creativity is insight driven in that most humans, if given the chance and if they had the time, would help somebody else if they knew they could, would help someone who was vulnerable. Maybe the way we've been communicating with them isn't bringing that to life. Maybe I can see why a leaflet doesn't bring that to life. I can see why a newspaper ad doesn't bring that to life. What's the way that we can bring to life the moments that they've had that feeling? And at that point, capitalise on it. So watch the videos, because there is this wonderful moment when the actors dig into this bag, give them the leaflet, and you just watch everyone's penny drop. Oh, I probably could help with this. And I know, Rob, when we've talked about this, you've said it's probably not just the 50 or 100 people they met on that day. Everything we know about storytelling, you were saying people who watched this on the news and online, and the millions who watched the viral campaign, each one of them would have gone, do you know what? I think I'm that sort of person too. And so for me, there are a couple of things that we can learn from Help the Omar that I get. Like, if you Google it, you'll see a few blogs or a bit of content on it, but I think they chime well with this topic. Is that right, Rob?
Yes, I absolutely love that story, Ben, and it makes me smile. The times I've watched the clips of that campaign, it always makes me smile, not least because of the playful, warm way in which the campaign has been conducted. And another of my favourite stories happened in Germany, and I wonder if our listeners could picture the scene. The town, I believe, is called Wunsiedel, and for years the citizens of Wunsiedel had this problem, which is, for reasons historical, a far-right group, a group of neo-Nazis, had for years, once a year, on a particular date, come to this town on a bus and staged a Nazi march. And as I understand it, the people of this town had done their best to stop this happening legally, but they were unable to do that. So they had this problem. The date is approaching. Every year this upsets us and sends a really horrible signal to our families, to our children, to the world about this thing happening. But we don't want to create violence, if we are too strong in our opposition, maybe that's exactly just playing into the hands of what the Nazis want. What could we do? So on this particular occasion, what they did was, as usual, the buses came in and the neo-Nazis got out wearing their black uniforms and with their swastikas, and some of them wearing stormtrooper helmets and carrying placards with far-right messaging on it. And as they started their walk, unbeknownst to them, they started to discover that they were unwittingly involved in a sponsored walkathon, in which the further they went along the route, the more money was being donated to a charity, which I think it's called Rechts gegen Rechts, and it's a charity which helps people who are trying to get out of Nazi groups, and it supports them to do that. And the further along the route they went, they were greeted by these lovely baby pink, playful, cheerful signs, and even messaging talking about how much money they had now raised for this cause, which was directly opposing the ideals of the marchers. And there was no violence. It was done very playfully. And so what happened was the citizens got to take control of this story rather than getting upset. Ultimately, they were having the last laugh.
I absolutely love this, Rob. And just like Help the Omar, have a Google of it. Rob, if I were Googling something, what would I be Googling to find this?
Well, we'll put a link in the show notes if we can. But I think if you just Google Wunsiedel Nazi March, Wunsiedel, I think what comes up on the first page is the intriguing title, How to Make Fun of Nazis. But one of the things I really like is the way the citizens of the town have chosen not to react the way many would, and understandably, but to choose their response in order to get the outcome they wanted. Ultimately, to control what this means and to ultimately have the last laugh.
I love that, Rob. I know when we've talked about this, you've said one of the things that helps make that happen is the power of asking the right question. I think so often when we're thinking through could be a presentation, could be a conversation, could be a campaign, the question might not be the most helpful one. I think Help the Omar came up with a very good question from a bit of insight, which is most people do care. We just need to find the way to help them. So their question became, how do we help people find that feeling? How do we help people find that feeling? I think that in this instance, there was probably another question that helped drive the ideas around this as well. Any ideas what that could have been? Or
yeah, again, for most of us, the question would be, how can we stop this happening in our town? Whereas I think a different, better question on this occasion was, if we accept it likely is going to happen this year in our town, how can we change the meaning, change the story so that nobody gets hurt and ultimately we feel we are not victims pushed around by this group, but we are in control really of what story the world is hearing about it.
I love that. And the power of that, I know in my own state and influencing, from how can I not be scared to how can I ridicule or put the humour, like it just changes everything about how I, like you said, the meaning I give to a situation, and then off they went.
Hey there, this is Rob, and I wanted to quickly let you know about our 2 long-standing courses designed to help you grow high-value fundraising results. That's the Major Gifts Mastery Programme and the Corporate Mastery Programme, which are starting again from October 2024. Of course, I could tell you all about them myself, but it might be more interesting for you to hear from someone who's experienced one of these courses. So here's some feedback we received recently from Naomi Campbell from a charity called Fields of Life, who took part in the most recent Major Gifts Mastery Programme.
It was amazing. I've worked now in the charity sector for about 8 years, and it's the best training that I've done in my time working in the sector. I think for me personally, it was about having the confidence and the techniques that you taught so practically and interactively and in such a fun way to really build my own confidence. I think I've noticed a huge shift in my own mindset when it comes to fundraising and working with major donors that has just allowed me to enjoy my job so much more, really. Trust fundraising can feel quite lonely at times, so to have that camaraderie, that group of people who are just willing you well, that you can learn from each other, safe space to bounce ideas off each other and then leave the room feeling more inspired, more determined, more encouraged to do the best job you can. I think tons of value in that for me.
To find out more about either Corporate Mastery or the Major Gifts Mastery Programme, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. One thing I'd love for our listeners to think about is not when could they use this kind of story in a big way, although maybe you do have a big problem to solve or a big campaign you need ideas for. It's more in the day-to-day of your job. What are you trying to solve today? Could you ask a slightly different question to lead to a slightly different response in how you do it to get the outcome you want? So, step one, what result do you want? There's someone on our Corporate Mastery Programme who just finished the final day just recently, and she shared with the group one of her success stories was she had heard that there was a restaurant chain going to set up a restaurant in her town, and that she saw on social media that they were interested in finding a charity partner to work with, not just for 1 year, but forevermore. And Kelly was very interested in this opportunity. Step one, rather than just check the website and fill in some form, she made sure she proactively got a conversation. So she called up the company and spoke to someone about this opportunity. And she asked them how to apply. And they said, oh, just send a proposal. And the more Kelly thought about it, the more she thought, well, I'm not quite sure filling in some PowerPoints or a few pages of written material. I'm not sure we can convey just what a great partner would be with the written page. So in that moment, I think her question in her own head was, how could I maximize the chances that they really love us and definitely want to work with us ahead of anyone else? If you ask yourself that question, I think sending a bit of paper is unlikely to be the answer. So she asked the person from the company, would it be okay if we sent a film as our proposal? And the person at the restaurant said, yeah, that would be fine. So Kelly went away and got the whole of her charity excited and created these various little messages, stories and scenes to absolutely match what she understood the restaurant owners to be looking for, so that they could feel this would be win-win, as well as just doing some wonderful good to an important cause. And long story short, she sent the film in. Her charity was chosen. I think there were 5 that were invited to send a proposal, and hers was the successful one she just shared in our group the other day. And so now, forevermore, as long as that restaurant is in this town, Kelly's charity will be the charity that benefits. Just to put that in context, she said this restaurant chain started working with another charity in 2019, and therefore for the last 5 years they've been supporting, and to date it's raised £200,000 for that other charity. So by Kelly not just doing the expected, A, getting the conversation rather than just check the website, and B, doing a different, better tactic, I think she's achieved an amazingly valuable win for her charity for the foreseeable future.
I love that, Rob. Most of the time when people have won things like this, it's because they've made that decision to make this a must, to make the phone call, to act on it, to create the video, to build the relationships internally, to try out the thing that might appear slightly riskier. This is what I think of as the bright spot moment. All 3 of these examples have a few things in common. If you hear what these 3 things are, this is how it could apply straight to your work. Rob, what are the things that you've noticed they have in common?
Okay. I think for all 3 of these stories that turned out well, these 3 questions, either consciously or subconsciously, were asked. Question 1, what outcome do I want? Secondly, what's currently getting in the way of that? What could prevent that happening? And thirdly, what could I do differently? How could I change my approach to increase the chances that I get the outcome that I do want? So I guess, Ben, could you answer those three questions? I know we weren't there in the campaign and maybe this is reverse engineering, but I think it holds true. As you look at the Help the Omar campaign, what outcome did they want?
They want more people to come forwards and volunteer to help older people. That is what they want.
And what might sometimes have been holding them back from achieving that outcome?
There are probably lots of things, but one of them is, most people do care at the right moment. They do care. It's just that isn't always what's coming across at the time that they're reading our advert, seeing it on Facebook. It's hard to transfer the fact that people care to the action of them signing up.
Yeah. And so what did they do differently to achieve that outcome, knowing that insight?
Knowing that insight that most people, if given the chance, do care. Remember, listener, when you're on the tube or underground, you help someone. They said, what can I do to find that feeling, put people in that situation where they are being their caring self and capitalise on it, for instance, with a leaflet that says, you are exactly what we've been looking for. That's my reverse engineering of those three questions, Rob.
And as I think of the example from Vincy Dell, I think that the outcome that the citizens wanted was, even if we can't stop the march happening, the outcome is for it to not ruin our day. And what currently was getting in the way of that, I think, was potentially a sense of powerlessness that these people are marching and there's nothing we can do to change what this means. Mm. And therefore, the third question, well, what could we do differently to change what this means? Well, then they got creative and came up with this genius mechanic that for every step you take, you are raising money for anti-fascist cause. In that moment, I think the people of Unseendael were able to do this wonderful creative thing because they asked those three better questions. And in terms of Kelly, what did she want? She wanted for the restaurant to get a really strong sense of how wonderful a partner her charity would be and for that to come across. What potentially would get in the way of that? Well, if she just obediently jumped through the hoops and sent in a written proposal as the other charities were being encouraged to, then the chances of that really wonderful opportunity for the restaurant coming through with Kelly's charity coming through, I think was limited. It could easily not stand out. And therefore, third question, what could she do differently? Well, she had, I think, little option given how high the stakes were, but to take a risk and do things slightly differently. And therefore, she made the film, which maximised the chances that that would come through. Now, listeners, I know that there's lots of proposals you may have to do. There are really strict criteria and rules about what is and isn't allowed. I'm not saying that Kelly's approach will work for all of those situations, but I am saying for whatever important project or task you've got to do this week, asking those three questions, what outcome do I want? What's currently potentially getting in the way of that message really being received and that outcome being achieved? And therefore, what could I do differently? Potentially, it might be a braver thing, more time-consuming thing to pick up the phone or make a film or go and actually visit your potential partner or colleague or whatever. But the third one, what could you do differently? Today, see if these three questions might just help you go the extra step when the stakes are really high and it's important that you get a result. So thanks ever so much for your time today, Ben, for sharing the wonderful Help the Omar story and for this discussion and all your insights. I look forward to catching up with you very soon. For now, Ben, bye-bye.
Bye, Rob.
So there you go. I hope you found these stories and our ideas helpful. As we always do, we'll put a summary and some notes with timestamps in the episode notes on the podcast section of our Bright Spot website. If you've not already subscribed to the show, please do click that button now. You'll immediately get access to hundreds more Bright Spot stories and tips to help you with your fundraising, and you won't miss out on the brand new episodes I'm excited to share in the next few weeks. And if you'd like to find out more about our two famous training programs, that's Corporate Partnerships Mastery or Major Gifts Mastery, which have now helped hundreds and hundreds of people to grow their results over the last 10 years, we are now taking bookings for the next programs. We know from long experience that these courses always sell out. So if you'd like to find out more, please find a way to do it today. All the info is at brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. And if you found today's podcast helpful, please do share it on with your team and with other charities on social media. I'm always incredibly grateful when you're able to get these free resources out to help as many good causes as possible. Do let us know what you think. Ben and I are both on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the Fundraising Bright Spots show. Good luck with your creativity and with being brave with your fundraising. And I can't wait to share more Bright Spot stories with you very soon.